Picture this. A young man in ancient Greece sits under a tree asking his teacher very uncomfortable questions about justice and truth. Now, his teacher gets so frustrated that he is eventually put to death for corrupting the youth. Now, that young man was Socrates, and a simple question, what is the right way to live, started a chain reaction that gave birth to Western critical thinking and democratic ideals through Aristotle's logic and Plato's vision of just governance. When you stand in the coffee shop weighing whether to choose the healthier option or the one that tastes better, you're using the very same questioning process that Socrates created many years ago. Let me show you exactly how these ancient minds are still working inside yours every single day. The blueprint hidden in your brain. You see, your brain operates on thinking patterns that feel completely natural, questioning assumptions, weighing evidence, seeking truth to logical steps. But these mental processes aren't instincts you were born with. While children naturally ask why about everything, the systematic critical reasoning you use to navigate complex decisions developed gradually over generations, building on logical approaches that began with ancient Greek philosophers. What if I told you that the way you think through problems today traces back to people who lived over 2000 years ago? The mental toolkit you use when facing difficult decisions, the way you structure arguments in your head, the process you follow when trying to figure out if something is true or false. All of these were developed by three philosophers in ancient Athens who spent their days asking questions that most people found annoying or just dangerous. Now, these ancient Greek thinkers created something called the Socratic method, which is the art of asking very simple, right questions to find genuine answers. Socrates noticed that most people held very strong opinions about justice, courage, and virtue without even examining where these beliefs came from. So instead of telling people what to think, he developed a technique of asking strategic questions that forced people to discover the weaknesses in their own reasoning. This approach emerged from the settings captured in Plato's writings, where Socrates would engage people in conversation, asking very simple questions like, "What do you mean by that?" And "How would you know that?" Until people realized that they didn't actually understand their own beliefs as well as they thought they did. When you pause before making a big decision and ask yourself, what would happen if I choose this path? You're using the Socratic method. When you find yourself in heated discussions and step back to ask, what exactly are we disagreeing about? I'm a bit confused. You are then employing his method of clarifying definitions before continuing an argument. This approach, rooted in these ancient dialogues, prevents you from wasting time arguing about different things while using very same words. When you challenge someone's opinion by asking, "How do you know that's true?" you're channeling Plato's approach to finding reality. Plato took his teacher's questioning method and applied it in bigger questions about knowledge itself. His theory of forms distinguished between knowledge of eternal, perfect forms and mere sensory opinion about the imperfect material we all experience every day. His famous cave allegory teaches us to question whether what we see on the surface represents the whole truth at all. So today when you see a news headline and think, wait, let me check whether there are other sources supporting this news, you're using Plato's insight that a first impression of reality might be incomplete or very misleading. When you break down complex problems into simpler, smaller pieces or chunks to solve them, you're using Aristotle's logical framework. What is that, you might ask? So he created the foundation of systematic thinking by organizing human reasoning into clear steps through his development of something called syllogism, which is logical arguments like, let's say, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is immortal. So you see that logical linking That's just called a logical reasoning or argument method. Now, he taught people to identify premises, examine evidence, and draw conclusions based on logical connections than emotional knee jerk reactions. So, his approach helps you tackle overwhelming problems by dividing them into manageable parts that you can address one by one and not get overwhelmed. Every time you use critical thinking at work, every time you question what you see on social media, every time you refuse to accept something just because someone in position or authority told you so, you're using tools these philosophers built. When you read a product review and ask yourself whether the reviewer might have ulterior motives or they've just been paid for by the vendor to say something, you're applying philosophical skepticism. When you hear a politician make very grand claims about what they're going to do, your first instinct to look at their past history of what they've actually done to support that, you're using the philosophical principle that authority alone doesn't make something true. These ideas weren't consciously designed to shape modern thought, but they were gradually adopted into our educational systems. It started with institutions like Plato's Academy thousands of years back and Aristotle's Lyceum. Eventually, they spread through medieval academics and into the foundations of how today we teach our children and people how to think. The reason you can think independently and make reasoned choices is because three men back in ancient Athens decided that questioning everything was crucial than accepting easy and simple and safe answers. But thinking clearly is just the beginning. These same philosophical traditions also created something even more fundamental that protects you every single day. You see, there are invisible laws that protect you. Every morning, when you speak your mind without fear, you're living proof of an idea that almost got someone killed for even suggesting it. When you post your opinions on social media, let's say Facebook, or complaints about your boss to your friends, or you express your disagreement with any political decision, you're exercising freedoms that most humans throughout history could never imagine having. You take these rights for as granted because they feel just natural and as something you feel everyone deserves. Like breathing or walking, your fundamental rights, you say. Free speech, fair trials, the belief that all people have equal worth. But these things weren't obvious truths that humans always had. For thousands of years, societies operated on completely different principles and frameworks. Medieval Christendom, for example, blended religious and royal power. So that meant kings claiming divine authority to rule absolutely. Speaking against the ruler meant treason and possibly meant certain death. Social classes were considered permanent and natural, with nobles born to rule, peasants born to serve. The idea that a farmer's child could have the same basic human worth as a prince's child would have seemed laughable and ridiculous to many societies. Go back to ancient India, and not too long back, even the last century, where caste system, and it still is present in many parts of society in India, in the Hindu culture, where Brahmins are considered the cream of the crop, and Dalits are still untouchable in many parts of India. Many modern rights trace back to philosophical arguments about justice and liberty developed over centuries, from Stoics to Enlightenment thinkers. The Stoic philosophers, especially Marcus Aurelius, introduced the very radical idea that human beings had inherent dignity, all of them, and they had inherent dignity and worth regardless of their social status. Now, Marcus Aurelius, you need to know, held the most powerful position in the Roman Empire 2000 years back. Yet, he wrote in his book called The Meditations. Now, this is a book you can buy in any modern bookshop today. He writes about treating slaves, servants, and common citizens with respect and recognition of their basic humanity. Now, you might think that's simple, that's obvious, right? But this was a revolutionary thought in a world where he was born, where your birth determined your entire life path. The Stoics taught that your character and choices matter more than your family name or wealth. and the concept of natural law influenced medieval and early modern thinkers on universal rights. When Cicero argued that laws should apply equally to rich and poor, he was building the foundation for a right to a fair trial. Before philosophical arguments about justice took hold, wealthy people could literally buy their way out of any criminal charges, while poor people faced very harsh punishment for minor offences like taking bread because they were starving to death. Cicero insisted that true law must be consistent and impartial, treating a wealthy merchant's theft the very same way he treated a poor man's theft. His work influenced Roman law, which later fed into medieval canon law, which eventually contributed to English common law and the principles that justice meant applying the same standards to everyone. When John Stuart Mill developed his harm principle in On Liberty in 1859, he created the philosophical basis for your freedom of speech. Mill studied how Socrates faced execution for expressing very unpopular ideas, and he realized one thing, that society progresses only when people can safely share new thoughts and challenge any accepted belief. He argued that you should be free to say and do whatever you want as long as you don't harm others. Now, this philosophical framework directly influenced the legal protections that allow you to express controversial opinions without government sanction or punishment. Medieval philosophers like Thomas Aquinas helped articulate more limited authority by drawing on classical sources. Now, this contributed to evolving ideas about the relationship between individual freedom and social order. These discussions led to the modern understanding that you should have zones where government power should and cannot reach, like your personal correspondence on WhatsApp or your what you do in your home should be your business. The concept that you deserve to be treated fairly by police, that you have the right to remain silent, that evidence must be presented before you can be convicted. All of this grows from philosophical seeds planted in very ancient soil. The presumption of innocence comes from philosophical arguments about the burden of proof and the very stark danger of false accusations being thrown around without any evidence. Your right to legal representation traces back again to philosophical debates about fair procedure and equal access to justice. So when police officers read you your Miranda rights, they are reciting philosophical principles that took centuries to develop and implement. When judges today instruct juries to consider only evidence presented in court, they're enforcing philosophical standards about rational decision making and fair procedure and avoiding bias and prejudices. These intellectual traditions created the legal and social framework that protects your daily freedom. Yet, these same thinkers didn't just protect your rights, they also developed practical tools for something far more personal, finding peace when life becomes overwhelming. Now, this is where philosophy is something which you can apply in your daily life. You see, my friends, philosophy isn't just something abstract, which you just read on a book and think about ancient Greeks. These are things, principles, when you learn to apply in your day to day life, you can use it to find inner peace and your calm in a more meaningful manner. You know that feeling when everything goes wrong at once and you need to find calm in your chaos. Your phone breaks on the same day you get very bad news from your doctor, or your relationship feels very strained, your bank account looks very poor. In those moments, you need something stronger than deep breathing exercise, or mindfulness, or positive affirmations, or motivational quotes. You need some simple practical tools that actually work when life hits you very hard. What if the most effective stress management techniques weren't invented by modern psychologists, but by people facing war, plague, and political upheaval 2000 years back? Ancient philosophers didn't live in safe, comfortable worlds where their biggest worry was choosing what to watch on streaming services. They dealt with actual life or death situations every day. Political persecution, slavery, disease outbreaks, and military invasions every single year of their life. They needed mental tools that worked under extreme pressure. So these are tried and tested techniques they used and they propagated and they implemented in their own life. not just during peaceful moments of reflection and meditation. The Stoics developed what they call the discipline of perception, the practice of separating what actually happened from the story you tell yourself about what happened. This technique recognizes that your emotional pain usually comes from not the event themselves, but from your interpretation of these events or what your brain makes up about these events. So let's do an example. So when your boss criticizes your work, the actual event is someone speaking words about your performance. That's black and white, right? But the story you tell yourself is a lot more complicated. It can go on the realms of, I must be terrible at my job. Everyone must be laughing at me behind my back. I must be incompetent. And I'll probably be found out soon. And I might get fired soon. You see, the Stoics taught people to notice this difference and stick to the facts rather than the dramatic story your brain is developing. This approach closely mirrors cognitive restructuring techniques used in modern CBT or cognitive behavior therapy. This is where therapists help clients identify and challenge distorted thinking patterns. So 2000 years back when Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have the power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find your strength." Now he was giving you a tool you can use today. When your boss criticizes your work or your relationship hits a very rough patch, he understood that you can't control what other people say or do, but you can control how you process and respond to the actions. This isn't about pretending bad things don't hurt you or forcing yourself to be in denial about difficult situations. It's about just recognizing where your actual power lies and limiting and funneling your energy to those things that matter, instead of wasting it on things which are beyond your influence, where even if you put your energy, it's not going to make a difference anyways. Epictetus, again, during that same time period, taught the concept of focusing only on what you can control. Your actions, your responses, your choices, while accepting what you cannot control, like other people's behavior or unexpected setbacks which you can't hold back. He created practical exercises for identifying your sphere of control in any situation. So when you're stuck in traffic, you can control your reaction to it, but not the traffic itself, right? When someone treats you rudely, you can control your response, but not their behavior. They're going to be miserable in their own behavior, into their own as they grow older. When you face financial problems, you can control your spending decisions, perhaps your job search efforts to further your financial capabilities, but not the overall economy. Buddhist philosophy, which developed alongside Greek thought, contributed to the mindfulness practices that help you observe your emotions without being overwhelmed by them. So these techniques, rooted in Buddhist meditation traditions, have been empirically validated to show that it results in stress reduction by numerous clinical studies. Instead of trying to stop feeling angry or sad or worried, these techniques teach you to just notice these emotions as temporary experiences that rise and fall like waves. You learn to watch your thoughts and feelings without immediately believing them or acting on them. So this creates like a space between you and your emotional reactions, giving you room to choose how to respond. Call it like a healthy detachment of sorts. These aren't abstract concepts. They're all practical techniques that contemporary studies and CBT draw upon, showing reduced anxiety in many trials. So they're all proved and tested. The same mental exercise that helped ancient philosophers survive deep persecution and hardship now help you handle workplace stress and your modern living. Therapists today teach people to identify cognitive distortions, challenge negative thought patterns, focus on just those actionable steps which they can control. You deserve to know that the inner peace and emotional resilience you're seeking aren't modern inventions which were built by modern psychologists at all. They're all drawn from ancient wisdom that's been tested by centuries of very horrid and traumatic human experience. These philosophers created mental tools during humanity's most challenging periods, and those same tools work very well today in your daily struggles. You don't need perfect circumstances to find your calm. You just need to apply some of these basic principles. These ancient thinkers were not creating abstract theories for fun. They were trying to solve deep societal problems. So the next time you see a news headline and pause to ask what evidence is supporting this before sharing it, you're practicing something which ancient philosophers taught us how to do it. Let me challenge you this way. What if you are the next philosopher for the next generation? Can you think of something, a framework you can develop, which could build into policy or how society operates in the next 100 years? You see, people like Socrates, people like Marcus Aurelius, we're not thinking that 2000 years later we would be employing all of their principles and frameworks. They did it because the society back then needed that. If you can think on the same terms, if you can think of what society needs now, and if you can develop a philosophy of sort, a life framework of sort, build it, draw on it, take a blank sheet of paper, draw out the problems which you notice, and then try to create a framework. Talk about it. Talk about it on YouTube. Create a channel. Talk about your philosophy and how a simple technique you come up with could reduce a problem which society faces. You see, your philosophy can impact not only your life, it could impact society now, but also it could impact the entire trajectory of how humans live their lives hundreds of years from now. Now, that, my friend, is how powerful philosophy is. So, to conclude, philosophy is not useless at all. It is extremely powerful. It builds every framework around us. It builds the societal principles, the structures, and it gives governing principles and values and ethics and morals. Everything else is built upon what deep philosophers have thought and argued and debated upon. So it's extremely important that you understand the importance of philosophy, and it's important that you harness it in your day to day life. I wish you the very best as you do that. Thank you.